know who has access to what? This is the Identity at the Center podcast. If you're looking for identity and access management talk, you've come to the right place. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm here with Jim in Las Vegas. Hey, Jim.
Viva Las Vegas.
Viva Las Vegas. We're here to give our thoughts on the last IAM conference of the decade.
Okay.
The Gartner IAM Summit. We've been here for the last few days, taking in the sights, the sounds, the buffets.
The buffets. I was going to say, if we don't take some time to talk about the buffets, I don't want to be on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, totally. So I'm going to go ahead and say Caesar's definitely better than Cosmo.
Yeah.
We enjoyed the Cosmo buffet earlier today, and as a direct comparison, because those are only two buffets I've been to,
right.
Caesar's wins hands down. Now it's also like what, twice, 3 times as expensive?
Yeah, it's a lot more expensive. So, I mean, you get what you pay for when it comes to that. But, I mean, so yeah, first off, we're staying at the Cosmo. I think the rooms at the Cosmo are fantastic. I mean, I think the food court that they have here is pretty amazing. They've got a lot of great restaurants, and the buffet is really good. I think if it was the only buffet you've ever been to, you'd say buffets are fantastic. I love it. But if you've been to the Caesars, which is called the Bacchanal, it's like seafood heaven.
Yeah, it's like going from one part of the Magic Quadrant to another.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah? There you go. What a segue.
So speaking of Magic Quadrants, Gartner Conference, all about identity and access management. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. I know that sometimes Gartner gets a little bit of a bad rap around content being too vanilla, and I can certainly see the case of that sometimes. But in the specific for this year, I thought the keynotes actually were really good.
I thought the keynotes were fantastic.
Yeah. My favorite was the one around culture that was given by Dr. Steve Robbins. It was really entertaining. It was funny, and it talked really about a couple of things. The ability to multitask, or more accurately, the ability of not being able to multitask. The inability, right? People just aren't very good at multitasking, and he gave a great example of that, and actually had some audience participation where you had someone come up, and the whole point was to do the alphabet, A through Z as fast as you can, and I think the lady got it done in something like 6 seconds or 7 seconds or something like that, right?
Ballpark, yep. And
then do the same thing with numbers, count from 1 to 26 in sequence, go as fast as you can. It's okay, no problem, right? That was another 6, 7 seconds, whatever it was. And then the wrinkle came in. It was count from A to Z and 1 to 26, alternating at the same, all the way through.
A1, B2, C3.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when it's like, okay, the wheels are starting to come off a little bit. Got it done, but it was obviously a lot slower. I think it was like 50 seconds or something, almost a minute
yeah.
to go the thing. And also had to get help from the audience because you start to lose your place where things are at.
Right.
And, it really brings out, in my mind, what I was thinking of, and of course I bring back to computer because I'm a big nerd, alt-tabbing. Right? So I'm alt-tabbing between two different applications in my brain. One that's going A through Z, the one that's going through 1 through 26. And you know how sometimes when you're looking really quickly between spreadsheets and PowerPoints or whatever it may be, sometimes you alt-tab the wrong way.
Right.
Right? So that was kind of like the way that I kind of put it in context for myself.
Well, you weren't the only one who was impressed by that one. We met a guy named Nigel. Mm-hmm. So, hey, Nigel, if you're listening, from Switzerland. And he was planning on bringing that whole piece back to his team and running that exercise with them. But, yeah, I mean, I thought that. So what I said to him was that we have a concept similar in consulting called context switching. Mm-hmm. So if you're working on, multiple clients, let's say you're working on 5 clients in a single day, and you're planning on putting an hour toward each one of their projects, it takes a good 15 minutes to go from, I was thinking about this client to now I'm thinking about that client and having to remember the people, the context for their IAM situation, their business context, and things like that. And so, yes, you can do it, but you're not as productive. And so if you were to take 15 minutes and truly, not count that context switching, you turn 5 hours of work into 7 hours of work like that.
Yeah. I think that, that's an interesting point because I think, I've been in consulting now for 4 whole years. And I think that's the hardest part of the job. and I still don't feel like I'm great at it because I naturally want to dig deep into problems and kind of let's fix this thing. And when you have to change tracks, that's going to be difficult. And the more tracks you have to switch, it becomes a lot more difficult.
So I've been doing it for 8 years. I'm still not good at it. So I don't think you're going to get much better. We had a customer appreciation dinner while we were out here, and one of our clients I was working with recently out of Atlanta, and he mentioned what you guys turned around in 2.5 days it blew me away. It was like you worked here for 20 years, and I know with that particular client, I had no context switching. I was like, I was on site with them for a week, came back, worked on their project for the 2.5 straight days, turned over a deliverable to them, and they were just like completely blown away because it was like 2.5 days of solid focus, and it's such a difference maker.
And it's all fresh in your brain, and you're not having to kind of go back and refer to notes and.
Right.
I think it's a little bit of load management, right? If we want to talk NBA terms.
Yeah, right.
LeBron, he's played every game so far this year, but at some point, he'll probably take, a few off. Kawhi Leonard, he takes off games here and there. And,
right.
I think if you're able to focus on that particular task, get, pretty good headway into it, makes it a lot easier to kind of keep it going and tend to be a lot more successful with it.
The good thing is if we stay focused, we won't get injured.
Sure. Until your just brain just goes.
Yeah, that does happen.
That's what PTO is for. So.
That's right.
And I've got some coming up, so I am totally looking forward to that. The other thing too is I think it also applies to IAM programs, because the truth of it is very few IAM programs are going to have enough resources, enough funding, and enough bandwidth to do multiple tracks of technology program all at the same time. And I think that's where the prioritization really becomes a very important part of the strategy, because you're probably going to be jumping around a little bit, but you don't want to be jumping around too much, because switching those gears, especially if someone is wearing multiple hats, becomes a lot more difficult as well.
Yeah, right. You're going to, there's kind of a multitasking tax. You probably could run multiple tracks, but you're going to need to bring in more help to get it done. You're going to need to spend more money than maybe if you spread it all out.
Yeah, totally. The other thing that came out of that same keynote was around, it was a culture talk, I guess would be the right way to put it. But there wasn't super much culture. I guess it was kind of a little bit of both on how the brain works, but also that was really the context of creating the appropriate culture within an organization, a team, a project, whatever it may be. And, essentially, people are much more effective when they feel included and part of the tribe, the team, the project, whatever it may be. And they're just that much more effective versus not being part of that. And I know that you and I always talk about getting the business involved and making sure that all the appropriate stakeholders and, when we do on-site discovery sessions and remote discovery sessions, whatever it may be, as part of the work we do, trying to get as many people involved with that. And, sometimes it's a technical reason. Right. Sometimes it's purely political, right? Making sure people's voices are heard and they were part of the problem and helping develop part of the solution. Whatever minute percentage that might be, at least they were included. And, that I think that helped kind of validate that approach that we typically take.
There are a lot of things that happened during this conference that I thought validated a lot of what we do and a lot of what we say, and I started wondering to myself, is that because we've been coming to this conference every year that really we're actually just thinking what they're telling us? But I don't think it's that. I think we are kind of ahead of the curve on certain things, and the other thing is what our experience is telling us is probably what other people's experience is also telling them. I thought the keynotes were great. And it's funny, from that multitasking or prioritization and focus, one of the things that I noticed in the conference is that there were certain themes that were really focused on. AI was really focused on strong authentication. And to me, it felt like authentication was like more the theme this year, whereas last year was more around identity governance and administration. And so I feel like Gartner's in the same boat, where they've got to put more emphasis on certain areas, certain years, than in other areas. And So I think that also goes with that kind of, they've got to focus and they've got to put, you can't go in and just shotgun every IAM topic and say they're all equally as important. There are some topics or some themes that I want to get into in a little bit, but still in that keynote piece, right before the culture and multitasking keynote that you were just talking about, there was a keynote on communicating, which I had a lot of great takeaways from. And it was a couple of folks from Gartner who delivered the speech, and they kind of were doing some role playing of various C-level actors within the organization, and just kind of like it was almost a shtick, or it was like almost like a Saturday Night Live type skit where they'd go in and they'd show here's the wrong way to do it, and someone would blast in and just start a bunch of techno babble about how the sky is falling and how we're getting hacked and we're getting scanned. And then they would go and do it in a way that was much more effective. And even though we're all IAM practitioners sitting there listening to it, and we probably understood the first skit, where he was doing all the techno babble, everybody, I think, 100% of the people in the audience would agree the second way, the kind of telling the story was the more effective way, even for technically minded people. So the idea was, tell a story, remember that the higher-ups don't know IAM, and they don't really want to know IAM. Focus on informing and educating, influencing a decision, and then changing behavior. So, try to take an idea that might be complex and somewhere that you need to invest, something like strong authentication, try and tie it to a business initiative or something that the higher-ups really understand that, hey, this initiative, like rolling out a new digital transformation or the new marketing website, and then tie your investment to why that's important, why that's going to enable the business to be more successful with that. The other thing was pilot your message with non-experts. So, it's so often that, Jeff and I will bounce our ideas off of each other. And the thing is, I could just technobabble multi-factor authentication and strong auth, and he'll know the nuances in between. But that's not really who my audience is going to be. It's not other IAM experts. It's people who don't really know IAM. And then the last one, which I thought was interesting, and I'm still chewing on this a little bit, which is understand the risk appetite of your audience and decision makers. So one of the skits that they did was this whole thing like, it was the Chicken Little, the sky is falling, we're getting scanned. Other organizations, they've had a data breach and they lost $8 million and things like that. And it was just like, all this crazy stuff. And then, the response from the CEO was like, yeah, we're not like them. In other words, it was kind of like that sales pitch didn't work for him. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like you have to reshift the context of what you're going to say based on understanding that risk appetite for the audience, understanding what are the push buttons for those people that are going to get them to listen to you. And so I think this is important for Jeff and I because we're often presenting to a senior audience and we don't always know those folks. Yeah. So we really need to rely on our counterparts at our clients to kind of prep us to understand these are the things that are on these folks' mind. And if they don't know, it's like, well, then we need to do further investigation. We need to find out who understands how that person thinks and what their risk appetite is.
Yeah, because sometimes the folks that we're working with, they don't have that much interaction with, the C-suite or the executives and so forth. So getting that message across is important. And yeah, I like that session too. I feel like you really do have to know your customer, to put an IAM spin on it, of who you're going to talk to and what type of message resonates with them. The story's good, emotions, etc., but there are folks out there who take emotion out of it, and they're looking for facts, figures, statistics, basically evidence to support your position. And you should have those even if you are going down and a story, based pattern of telling, whatever message you're trying to do, is you should know your information behind the scenes as well.
Right.
80% of breaches have something to do with identity and access management, typically a compromised credential, etc. Have that figure in the background and say, hey, you know what? however you're going to explain the message to whoever we're presenting to, or people who are listening if they're talking to their folks. Understand who you're talking to and tailor the message in a method that makes sense to them. And if you don't know the person you're talking to, try to do some intel. Talk to people who might know, hey, what's Jim like, right? Well, Jim likes baseball, and if you can throw a baseball analogy in there, bang, all of a sudden you've got, maybe a way in. Now, you don't want to get too deep with Jim because he'll definitely blow my doors off when it comes to baseball.
Yeah, if you use a wrong baseball analogy and, you mix pitching and hitting or something like that, you might lose me.
It'll be like the Coming to America scene where they're talking, where Eddie Murphy's character goes to watch a football game, and he's trying to impress the girlfriend's father, and he's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's the danger. But, I just like a little takeaway I had, the best one-liner I heard all week was that hackers don't break in, they log in.
Oh, yeah, that was awesome.
I thought that was awesome. It's like, bringing it back to identity access management, when you're talking about the 80% of breaches, but, you talk about these data breaches, what are people doing? They're not putting up, it's funny because we show the pictures of people who are, oh, this is a hacker, he's got like a ski mask on, and it's like traditional physical security. It's not like that. Somebody logs into a computer, whether they're an insider or an outsider, they're just hammering away on a computer, or maybe, I think the biggest way that people get their hands on credentials is still phishing.
Phishing is definitely still,
they
the
trick
number one
people
form of attack.
into giving over their credentials.
Yep. And once you've got one credential, people tend to reuse that credential. So now you just try that same credential against a whole bunch of other services, and even if you only hit a percentage of of those,
right,
that's all it takes.
Right. Yep.
And I think that also talks a little bit about CARTA, right? So you talked about CARTA, I don't know, it was last week or maybe the week before, maybe both. And that's Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment, which is a crazy long name. I'm going to stick with CARTA.
Yeah.
I did attend a session on that, and I thought that was pretty good. I know that's been something I think that you've been kind of looking at recently. Did you go to that session, or?
I did go to that session. So to me, it kind of seems theoretical still. Here's what's happening is that, and I even saw a statistic that it was from the Gartner MQ on access management, that 60% of access management solutions will have UBA built into them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the timeline was. Maybe it was like
I think it was like by 2025 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
something like that. So the idea is that, the next generation of access management is going to look different. It's not just IAM is who has access to what. It's not just letting people in the front door, but after they're in the front door, continuously monitoring their session, building a risk profile, and determining whether or not the person should be challenged. It's, knowing what resources they're accessing, things like that. It's all the things that you can see the foundational components for the major access management vendors are have in place today, but they don't have that risk intelligence. One of the major themes of IAM right now is artificial intelligence and machine learning. I mean, so here's what do you do with that information? Well, if you already kind of bought off on your single sign-on solution, you're already implemented and things like that, there's probably not a whole lot that you need to do, but start becoming AI focused and machine learning focused in your IAM program overall. Look for opportunities to get your feet wet with that. Look for opportunities to take that and make your identity administration, your governance, and your authentication processes more intelligent and more using machine learning more to become more secure. But if you're in the process now of selecting a vendor, look for a vendor that's already got that as part of their message, that's already working on it. If they're not working on that now, if they're not saying that's the future that's coming, then they're probably already behind the 8 ball, right? If they're not one of the leaders in the market, if they're on the lower end of the market and they're not talking about machine learning, you got to wonder what's their place going to be in this space 2-3 years down the road. And really, do you want to kind of go and invest in deploying their technology? I'd say probably not.
Yeah, it's something we've seen Microsoft really touting recently, right? All the advanced analytics that they're doing on Azure, and they run a world-class IAM system for all their users across Windows and Outlook and et cetera.
Right.
So they have a lot of experience and data that they can pull in as part of that. But they've made it core to their Azure message of behavior analytics, and that kind of feeds the conditional access and adaptive authentication, kind of all the stuff that's kind of been there now
Right.
is just going to become even more supercharged over the next,
Yep.
5 years. And it's 2025 sounds a long ways away, but that's only 5 years. It's 2020 in a few weeks.
Yeah, oh my goodness, don't tell me that.
The other area that I thought was interesting, I'll just touch briefly on, was privilege access management. It seems like the bar has changed a little bit. So from a basic level of maturity, it used to be really just password vaulting. Now it's vaulting, MFA, and privilege session recording and monitoring is sort of the baseline.
The entry level.
Yeah,
Right.
from a privilege access manager perspective. And then from there, then you start to look at things like service account management, application, or app-to-app password management, those sorts of things. And I think the long-term trend is more along the lines of just-in-time permissions versus someone who perpetually has access. So a lot of the companies we talk to, and this is fairly common practice, is I have my account and then I have my domain admin account. And I'm supposed to only use my regular account for day-to-day stuff and then use my domain admin account, when it's required, etc. But I retain possession of that domain account all the time, which means that it is an open door that potentially could be phished, breached.
It's so important to do. So if anybody's, I don't want anybody to get the message that they shouldn't do that, because
the separation is very important.
Separation is very important, just from a standpoint of if you get phished,
Yeah.
you shouldn't get phished putting in your privileged access credentials.
Wait, sir, hold on. It should be MFA, etc. But I think that the drive will be you do not have a domain admin account full time. So when you do need elevated permissions, you have some sort of process that grants you that just in time. Whether it's checking something out from a vault with a very specific time frame, or maybe you're using like your IGA platform to request an access that has some sort of time frame, associated with it. And obviously, you need to make sure you've got the appropriate audit logs, et cetera, to kind of show the chain of custody,
Right.
of that access. But I think that's a trend that we'll see over again, probably the next 5 years or so, is moving away from perpetual privileged access to more of a just-in-time model. And I know there's a few vendors out there that will look to play in that space. I'm thinking specifically of a company called Plain ID that we've talked to a few times over the few years, and that could be like an option maybe for just-in-time. You could do it certainly, I think, through an IGA platform if you have the appropriate permissions and access catalog and so forth set up.
You're definitely starting to see a blend, and one of my main themes that I saw is like there's a kind of an encroachment of, okay, if you looked at the space 2-3 years ago, you could say these guys were IGA vendors, these guys are SSO access management, these guys are PAM, and a lot of partnerships between the different vendors. Well, now what you're seeing is those partnerships are really getting stressed because the vendors in the different categories are starting to take on capabilities of the other categories. And so, obviously the growth or the opportunity from an individual company standpoint is to become a suite, to offer more services and products to their clients so that they can get a bigger piece of the pie. The growing pain in between is for us as practitioners to say, well, who's going to be successful and who's not, which partnerships are real and which ones are going to break down the next year or two, and it's not easy to figure out.
Well, it seems like we're getting cyclical now into that's what Oracle CA strategy was, 10 years, 15 years ago, was to be the suite, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do everything. Maybe they don't do everything well, or maybe they cobble it together through acquisition, et cetera.
They mostly did through acquisition.
Yeah, so now, there was a shift away from that to go more best of breed. That's where things like SailPoint popped up, and Okta, and CyberArk, et cetera, where they were attacking a very specific part of the IAM problem. You see companies like Savient now where they have the IGA component. They also do some level of privileged access management and reporting and analytics, and they look like they're kind of going a little bit down the suite level, kind of where Centrify was before they split up a few years ago, between provisioning and privileged access management. So I wonder if we're going to see at some point kind of the circle come full circle, and end up with like, okay, now it's the, I don't know, I'll just pick it like the SailPoint suite, and SailPoint does access management and privileged access management and MFA and all that sort of things. And I know they've tried to do some of those things and kind of stepped away from it. But companies are looking to be profitable. They want to land. They want to expand.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well,
How
a
do you
lot of
invest
more
your
of the IAM companies that were privately held are becoming public firms, and they have commitments to shareholders, and they've got growth markers on their stock price based on expected growth. I mean, think of all the years of like Amazon losing money, losing millions and millions of dollars, and but now look at them. I mean, can you imagine a world without Amazon?
I think a lot of people could, but they are super convenient.
Yeah, well, I can't. But there were some things that were kind of eye-rolling moments, and one of them was when I saw somebody say, like, "Oh, this is our Identity 3.0 strategy."
Oh, yeah.
And I kind of like, okay, here we go. We're gonna try and come up with, and I think when you brought up CA and Oracle, I really think they were in the Identity 1.0. All right.
Yep.
So I'm kind of spitballing here because I'm kind of thinking through this, but they had from the access management side, it was the first wave of access management. It was secure your web apps using our web server filters, and it was really focused on you running your own web applications in your data center. And then it became Identity 2.0 and access management, where the vendors like Okta, who said cloud apps and use a federation protocol. And at first it was like, if you were on the 1.0 side, you almost scoffed at that and thought like, that's not gonna solve the problem that big companies have. Well, you know what? Big companies started to say, we need those cloud apps too, and we want to shift toward that. And open standards like OpenID Connect, we can rewrite our applications to work with that, and it's a much better way. And when companies started to take the 2.0, Web 2.0 version of their apps and digital transformations, they started rewriting them towards those services. Now on the identity management side, it was the traditional access request provisioning to apps. So it was a push model from the center. And then identity governance came along. Vendors like SailPoint and Vexa said, no, we can just reach out in the apps and pull what they have, and then we can give you one place to go to know who has access to what. And again, a lot of folks scoffed. It was like, well, where's your automation? Well, they've realized, yeah, we do need to automate. We need to be able to push out as well. But that became the predominant force, and that's the force today. And so those two, I still think those are predominant forces, but you're starting to see the next generation that's going to come along is a focus on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and risk, and using all of those paradigms, if you will, to take those platforms to the next level. So will it be a true Identity 3.0? I don't know. But I still think where we're going to see the biggest transition is what you were just talking about, which is privileged access management. So from a privileged access management standpoint, those systems were primarily built around you're running your own data center. You're running your own data centers, number one. And we've seen the shift, and we said, okay, well, we can manage that through being able to federate identities into that and then get people access to servers and the console in a secure way, in a multi-factor way. That's, 1.1. So it's in other words, like you have a different data center and it's run by a different company. Where I really think your 2.0 is that the idea of servers starts to break down. You have, containers and you have Docker container, and you have automation and bots running everything. And servers that exist today don't exist next week, and you've got containers and things like that. And then you've got scripts that are rolling all this out. Well, now you have all these new credentials, or the hot term is secrets, which basically means credentials. How do you manage all of those things in a way? And here's the thing, is what has happened is all these things have happened. So this isn't groundbreaking stuff. The problem is like now information security or IAM programs are saying, how do we get our arms around it? We don't understand how it works. Well, what I can tell the IAM practitioners that are out there is like, if you want to stay relevant, if you want to be able to continue to provide a meaningful service to your organization, you better learn about this stuff. You better understand how DevOps works. And the place I would start is YouTube. And that's it. Watch a bunch of YouTubes. You're not going to understand it at first. You might need to have some conversations with other folks in your organization, understand how it's being done, but get a meaningful understanding of how this whole DevOps change is changing the landscape. That's really going to be PAM 2.0. And so what is 3.0? I'm not sure, but if we can get our arms around 2.0, we'll be in a good place. One of the things I saw was one of the vendors who was an IGA vendor was really talking about this as like their next generation of privileged access management, what they want to do. The vision's spot on. Right now where they're at is they want to at least be able to provide governance and visibility to all of those things. Who has access to these containers, who has access to the DevOps tools, things like that. But the other thing is like the bots. The bots are like people. The bots have to go out and like pull the credentials. So you need not only governance, you need not only visibility, but you actually need some tools, some vaults that are API driven or API based that the bots can reach into and pull from.
Yeah, the bots are a big deal. I don't think that's a fad. I see it everywhere. I was just working on a Windows laptop earlier today, and messing around with some power settings just because I like to goof around and test things out. And I don't know when they did this. It's probably probably within the last year or so. Is Windows has now integrated a bot as part of their troubleshooting in the OS, so you can do some natural language searching, etc. Somewhere that bot is able then to call some sort of API or hook within the OS to run specific troubleshooting settings within the OS itself. So that is extended already down to the user device. How do you manage that?
Right.
How do you make sure that one, you know about it, right? I think discovery is probably the biggest thing. Is before you can start managing all this stuff, you have to know about it. So being able to take an inventory of all of your access, including privileged, human, non-human, and even contractors like us who don't fit in either of those, depending on the organization, being aware of those. The other part of the keynote that I thought was interesting was around the Magic Quadrant discussions. So, I looked at they talked about the IGA one. That was the one I thought that was most interesting, personally. It's very clear SailPoint and Savient have really kind of stepped as the overall leaders in the space. SailPoint got a lot of love because of a lot of innovation that they've done this year, especially on their SaaS product, Identity Now. Savient as well is doing really well. They've really kind of separated from the pack, and I think we kind of talked about that in our Magic Quadrant episode a few weeks back, but they were definitely head and shoulders above other folks. The other one was Omada. Omada is not someone that's really known in the US as well. They're much bigger in Europe. Jim and I have looked at them before, and we both like it a lot, and they got really good kudos from the analysts that were talking about it in that same keynote. So it wouldn't surprise me that Omada sees a nice bump from that conversation, because they are just as capable as the other two. And I think competition is making it better for everybody, because it really is starting to become kind of a cutthroat battle between not just SailPoint and Savient. You've got Omada there. IBM is still out there doing things, but there's also some other products that might be a great fit that maybe don't carry the same weight as one of the bigger ones, but are good enough.
One of the big things that they talked about, they wanted to make sure that everybody understood, is like being on the Magic Quadrant is a major. That's a major step in itself. It's like making the cut. It's not easy to make the cut, and there were some vendors who didn't make the cut. I mean, on the IGA side, Microsoft's not listed, right? Yep. So I think that is something to consider. I think if you're the more niche your organization is, the smaller your organization is, especially when it comes to IGA and workforce access management, it's the more likely you are to not need someone who's in the upper right.
Right.
But I would say looking at the upper right, it's like is SailPoint, Savient, Omada, which was nice to see. It was a surprise. I think one of the things I like about them is their user interface. I think is great.
Yeah, it's very clean.
I think Savient user interface is great. I think SailPoint is they've just got such a track history of success.
Yeah.
And I think the other vendors were IBM and Oracle were in there.
No, Oracle slipped out of the leaders, so they've moved into upper left, basically like almost dead center if you're looking at the square altogether. So they've moved down. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Who has the best UI between Savient, SailPoint, and Omada overall.
This is
And
completely
it's personal preference. This is
yeah,
why
it's personal preference. It's bias.
This is
right?
why you should always look at the products. But
I like the
wanna know what
Savient
Jimmy
user
Mack thinks.
interface. To me, that's like
Which one?
Savient.
Savient. Okay.
I thought it was very intuitive. I thought it's web based and it's not. It doesn't look like Windows 10. It's like honestly, I'm not a Windows guy, and
A lot of people are.
I know. So again, personal preference. I'm not a Windows guy. I mean, I actually used to be. I was at MCSE way back in the day, before Active Directory was even a concept.
Man, you're old.
I am. I'm really old. I'm an NT4AI. But like those tiles, those panels, it just doesn't do it for me.
That doesn't do it for you.
Right? Isn't that what Omada's looks like?
Omada is like very clean. It's very like data driven. So it's like rows and rows and rows of data. Very simple. Some people I feel like Omada's is the most polarizing. You either love it or it's not enough for you.
Okay.
I do like Savient. I think they've been spending some time this last year doing UI updates. So they may not have that UI, the new refresh that they're working on across all of their capabilities yet, but the ones that do definitely look really sharp. So I like that card kind of approach. And we were at the Converge conference for Savient before Gartner just a few days ago, and we were only going to kind of get into it, but they did show some of the upcoming UI things, and there were some pretty neat things that were coming through there. And as much as SailPoint gets the love from being the leader for years, I don't think their UI is as good as either of those two. So if I had to rank them, it would be Savient, Omada, then SailPoint.
The only thing I would say to challenge that is, how important should a UI be to you? It really depends on if you want to drop it in, and there's two things. One is, first off, this is like your workforce, and what's more important is that they can find the stuff and do the job efficiently, right? You're not there to entertain them. But that's more the old argument. Really, where I was going to go is, the new UI is APIs.
Yep.
And in other words, one of the themes that I've heard mentioned a couple times is like use your ITSM. In other words, ServiceNow is the front end to requesting access. So if you're a tiny company, you're not going to do that. But if you're sizable, or if you have an external use case, what's more important is the API. So what it looks like in your web browser, out of the box is not very important. But if you're a smaller organization, you're going to drop it in. It may be an important consideration.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think UI is not as important as it used to be because of the API. I think it's more important for the people who are doing access reviews, which typically is not something done through an API, at least not right now.
Right.
Very common. Or if you're using your IGA platform as your access request interface.
Right.
And I see still a lot of companies that are split between, doing an ITSM. Do they do it in ServiceNow, or do they do it in SailPoint or Savient? And there are pros and cons for each of those, right? I've fought battles on both sides in my career as far as what preferences, and my opinion has changed over time, and it really does depend on the organization.
Mine goes back and forth. Yeah.
It
really depends.
If you're heavily invested in ServiceNow, look to get as much as you can out of it. Same thing for BMC. If you're looking at digital workplace, if that's something you're headed down, take advantage of it. If there's a gap that you see there, and you can't solve it, then maybe look at it. So the UI doesn't maybe make so much sense on that specific use case.
Let's also be clear about something, because I think this is important. Is we've run into clients sometimes who think, why do I need an IGA system? I have ServiceNow. They have this. They have this. They can provision to Active Directory. Did you see ServiceNow anywhere around this conference?
Nope.
No.
ServiceNow is not an IGA platform.
They are not an IGA platform.
Well, so ServiceNow by itself is not an IGA platform. So I want to talk about that in a second, because I want to talk about products we saw.
All right, there you go.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, so I think we beat that one pretty well. Let me think. So the last thing that I think maybe you want to touch on before we wrap up is products. So I'll start first. I'm going to ask you in a second here, what are some of the products that you think are not as well known that people should look at? So I'll go first because we just talked about ServiceNow. And that's ClearSky. So they have built an IGA platform on top of ServiceNow. It's a ServiceNow application. You can download it from the ServiceNow store, etc. License, etc. Super nice guys. Definitely, are headed in the right direction. Relatively new product, but they already do have some customers using it. And I think if you're an organization that has heavily invested or wants to heavily invest into the ServiceNow platform for, certain beyond, IT service management, tickets, service catalog, change management database, all the ITIL type functions that a lot of IT organizations want to get to. I think that's definitely one to take a look at, because if you can just run it on your ServiceNow platform, that's so much easier, right, than trying to stand up your own IGA infrastructure, etc. So that would be one to look at. The other one that I'll talk about is a company called Secure Ends. Recently had a demo with them a few weeks ago. I really like it. It's very focused on IGA, so it doesn't do more than that. It knows what it wants to be, at least right now, and that's identity governance and administration, creating accounts, removing accounts, running certifications, etc. Super simple to configure. I talked with Kelly at their booth here, and I offered them the tagline that they can totally use royalty free, and that is, so simple even your manager can configure it. So it is something that I think would be a very good option to look at if you are looking at the small mid-sized business type size, and you can't necessarily afford a SailPoint or need that level of a SailPoint or a Savient or even an Omada. It's a lower cost option. It looks really good. Do your due diligence on it, but those are the two products that I thought don't have a lot of name recognition right now, but are ones to keep an eye on: Clear Sky and Secure Ends.
Yeah, and I don't have a deep of a conversation on my two, but there's a company called Preempt. They're basically analytics and continuous threat protection, threat detection and continuous access type of play. And the idea, what I liked about them is, honestly, it's like their head is already on the future of what everybody's talking about, where the market's going. They're already there. They're already putting together something like that. Now, again, smaller company and kind of an emerging corporation, if you will, but they have a chance to, sometimes in the Magic Quadrant, companies can just show up overnight, right? They need to get kind of the market penetration and the customer adoption, but there's somebody who I think is doing some really cool stuff. Transmit Security is another one. Authentication platform, focus on strong authentication, the developer first approach. So I think the developer first approach, it's so funny. Like, I'm involved with some projects now implementing cloud IDP solutions. And you go in thinking, all right, it's going to be a lot of SAML integration and OpenID Connect integration. Well, when you get into OpenID Connect, you're working with the developers, and really, it's like that's where a lot of these projects end up. It's like, yeah, we can get the low-hanging fruit of integrating all of our cloud apps and our basic stuff with SAML or WS-Fed and things like that. But then eventually, you need to pull in the developers. Well, if you have a lot of developer built applications and only a handful of cloud apps, then that's going to lead you more toward a solution where it's fit for purpose. But really, the thing that I think makes these guys special is that they're focused on detecting risk, detecting a time where you need to do a strong authentication.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think what I was talking about was early in the podcast was that they had to focus on a few areas. There was a couple of the major areas I didn't hear a lot about. And, honestly, it could have been based on the different sessions I chose to attend and some of the ones I didn't attend. Obviously, you can't be in every session, but dealing with breaches and privacy regulations. Those were things that were a really big focus in the conference we were at in Seattle and talked about in September. Mm-hmm. But they weren't as much a focus. I think both of them were talked about, but I mean, those to me are things like that have to be top of mind for any IAM practitioner right now: privacy and breaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all these technologies, they are risk mitigation strategies.
That's right.
And that's what it boils down to, I think.
Risk mitigation strategies, and if the problem is like you can never block 100% of the problem, right? So you
not a prevention.
Like 99% prevention. If you're that 1%, you need to know how to deal with a breach, and then from a privacy regulation standpoint, you need to know the hammer that those regulators have, and they're real.
And if you're in an organization that knows you've got problems, and you choose not to spend to fix it, whatever it may be, people, process, technology, and that gets out after you've been breached, boy, you guys are going to be in a lot of trouble. So
Just assume it will.
yeah, exactly. So, something to think about there for people who are making budget decisions is, what is the cost of not doing it versus what happens when you get breached, not if.
Right.
And what is the aftermath that people have to deal with, after that. And I think that dovetails a little bit, too, back to the training side of things. People who are looking to get into IAM, who maybe not as familiar in some of the things that you were talking about earlier, get out to these conferences. These are a great way to learn. And I would encourage, managers and directors and folks who make decisions on budgets to send your people there, right? You need that talent just as much as anyone else does. And, it is a fast-changing market. So keeping up with the skills is a very important part of being in the business.
This is one of the best Gartner conferences I've been to in years.
Yeah.
I think that it was well attended, over 1,000 attendees.
I think it's at 2,500.
Wow.
Yeah,
and I'm not surprised. I mean, it just felt like everything was crowded.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for everybody. I highly recommend it for anybody who would choose to listen to this podcast should be, trying to attend this conference next year. So if you have to get it in the budget, do it. I also think if you ever find yourself in a position where you need a job,
yeah,
and you're in this space,
yeah.
if December rolls around, you're job hunting, you should definitely be here. Spend the money and come on your own. Say it, I don't know, like circus or something, but just be here.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, I think we'll close it there. There's one thing I want to touch on that was just want to thank the folks who took time now to meet with us when we were here on site. Shout out to the folks from our customer dinner who was sat at the advisory table. So Jody, Autumn, Marcia, Mike, Randy, and Brian.
You got them all.
I got them all. That is a record, I think, for me. We had great conversations around the dinner table there and then in the hallways and so forth. It was great to see folks and really kind of interact in a more casual manner, I guess would be the right way to put it, right?
Right.
And, have some conversations about not just IAM, but just kind of life in general and, commiserate and celebrate and all the things in between. So it was a great dinner, and I want to thank all those folks and the others who I didn't really talk to at the dinner, partners and so forth. But it was a great time. So
it's a great week overall.
Yeah, definitely was good times. All right, so with that, I think we'll close it out for this week, and we'll talk to you guys in the next one.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.